I met a traveler from an antique land who said, "Two vast and trunkless legs of stone stand in the desert. Near them, on the sand, half sunk a shattered visage lies, whose frown and wrinkled lip and sneer of cold command tell that its sculptor well those passions read, which yet survive, stamped on these lifeless things, the hand that mocked them, and the heart that fed." Ozymandias, Percy Bysshe Shelley. This is a near-forgotten monument, a grand facade of Ronald McDonald and his friends, slowly decaying alone on the side of a highway just outside of Columbus, Ohio. Next to this monument is a typical McDonald's restaurant, much like any other. A monument, by most definitions, is a timeless place, commemorating people, an era, an event, or an idea. Typically, monuments are constructed and dedicated by design, but other times, a monument is grown up from something unsuspecting through a combination of time, persistence, and familiarity. McDonald's, as a culinary institution, is built on familiarity. You may be anywhere in the world, but as soon as you taste a Big Mac, you are now at McDonald's. The power of that brand relationship built an empire of over 99 billion served.
As far as what I would order at McDonald's, I'm pretty classic. I like the 2 cheeseburgers with extra pickles.
I think the most superior item on the McDonald's menu is the bacon, egg, and cheese biscuit.
McDonald's pancakes, specifically, even though they're not the best pancakes, but that pancakes and that syrup.
I would have to go with my all-time favorite, which was chicken snack wraps.
Oh, easy. For me, it is a McChicken.
Oh, that's so easy, McChicken. God, I love the McChicken.
The true nature of how people eat and gather, however, is never so uncomplicated. And the real history of McDonald's is much more checkered and idiosyncratic than its monolithic brand image may suggest. As McDonald's restaurants grew from West Coast highway novelties to a nationwide juggernaut across the late 20th century, new locations began to adapt to their environment in unexpected ways. These were McDonald's restaurants that bucked the norm, through an unusual menu, bold architecture, or a wholly unique restaurant concept. I call them non-standard McDonald's. You've probably seen one.
We had a rock and roll McDonald's, which was a theme of McDonald's in downtown Chicago. And that was quite the production. It had like 2 stories. It was very themed, kind of a 1950s, mid-century.
There was a running miniature train around the ceiling at McDonald's. So when we would go as children, the main attraction was not necessarily the play place, but it was definitely the train.
When I was a kid, this McDonald's was Jack and the Beanstalk themed. And it was this weird mix between Jack and the Beanstalk and McDonald Land characters. So the front of it was Ronald kind of ushering you into this like storybook thing.
From the 1970s onwards, a growing subset of McDonald's locations across the country embraced these idiosyncrasies, whether they be statements of bold, entrepreneurial free expression, or a meeting in the middle between McDonald's corporate vision and the realities of the communities they served. This phenomenon rose, crested, and collapsed over the course of about 30 years. The vast majority of its monuments, cast to flotsam, like this one, were destroyed entirely. In order to understand how we arrived here, we've taken a pilgrimage to see what remains. This is a guided tour through some of the last non-standard McDonald's and their legacy. To understand what a non-standard McDonald's is, let's begin by looking at perhaps the healthiest living example, the Sand Lake Road McDonald's in Orlando, Florida, a stone's throw away from the major theme parks. Officially named the Epic McDonald's, this location claims to be the world's largest, but we haven't done the math ourselves. In Orlando, the overbuilt and unusual is practically mundane, so this 2-story burger palace is right at home. Let's join Billiam, our Florida cinematographer and an Orlando resident, to take a look at the place. There's certainly a lot to take in. As one can empirically observe, this McDonald's is, as they say, a genetic freak, and it is not normal. If it was too much to take in all at once, don't worry. We'll be returning here throughout our program. This short tour was meant to inform your expectations, mainly to expect the unexpected.
Okay, so there's a McDonald's that is really decked out with McDonaldland characters from Set Makers Inc. You have all the old statues, Mayor McCheese, Hamburglar, Grimace, Birdie, etc. You have McDonald's that are unusually site-specific and extremely vernacular to the area. We're thinking of like the Sedona McDonald's with the turquoise arches. And then there's a third one, which is an outrageous theme that seems to have no purpose. There's no reason, and that's the thing that people are fascinated by because it's just absolutely senseless. It's just very strange.
All of these cases have a common factor from which we can draw a comprehensive definition. A non-standard McDonald's is one whose shopping or dining experience is designed to differ significantly from the expected model of a typical grab-and-go restaurant, in an effort to better reach the community in its location, whatever that strategy may be. From that definition on out, almost any deviation is fair game. Does your McDonald's have a unique menu item like pizza? That's non-standard. Does your McDonald's design follow nearby historic architecture? Non-standard. Does your McDonald's float, as in the tragic case of the abandoned McBarge created for Vancouver's Expo 86 and left to rot in the decades since? I think I rest my case. But what are the origins of all of this evolutionary divergence? As it turns out, they go surprisingly far back in McDonald's history, all the way to the founding of its first location in 1940. Surprise! The very first McDonald's, if we apply our definition in comparison to its peers, was non-standard in and of itself. I know what you're thinking. So much gravity around the analysis of a hamburger stand. Let's take it a bite at a time and start from the very beginning. The broad history of McDonald's, from its founding to its expansion, is one of the most well-documented stories in culinary history. So, in the interest of time, we'll spare you most of those details. What's most important to address here is the genesis point for the very first design of McDonald's restaurants. In the beginning, there was the automobile. And only the automobile. The very first McDonald's restaurant had nowhere else to sit.
Well, the original McDonald Brothers hamburger stand was like an octagonal-shaped building with a glass front facade. It didn't have any arches on it.
This is the look that we culturally associate with the idea of a retro McDonald's, thanks mostly to that giant pair of arches that pass right through the slanted roof. But when this style of McDonald's was being drafted up in the 1950s, those very arches were a contentious decision.
The arches were invented, I guess, by Dick McDonald, though. They had worked with an architect. The architect designed this red and white tile building that would look more modern, different type of roof. And Dick was playing around with the designs one night, and he put these arches in it to stabilize it more, he thought. So he took this back to the architect, and the architect was like, oh, hell no. Those are the ugliest things. I am not putting that in my building. And so Dick was like, okay, go ahead and build your building. That's fine. That's great. So after he had his building built, he then went to a sign maker and said, hey, can you make me some arches that can go along the sides here? And the sign maker, of course, filled it with neon. And so the arches became this bright neon symbol of McDonald's.
With a little bit of a happy accident and a whole lot of salesman's intuition, Dick McDonald struck gold. The golden arches would imprint so deeply on the cultural consciousness of American diners that they would go on to become the McDonald's icon, living atop every McDonald's roadside sign and on every McDonald's paper bag. Ray Kroc anchored the arches as the keystone of McDonald's branding in 1962. But there wasn't unanimous agreement on just what sort of impression a standard McDonald's building ought to make. A regional divide on McDonald's architecture and what function it ought to serve emerged between different factions of national management.
After Ray Kroc took over, he had his manager of the East Coast, Terry Sonneborn. He was a financial guy. He was really conservative when it came to taking risks. So he was running the East Coast, and then Ray Kroc was running the West Coast. He was in California. So in California, they can have a patio outside all year long. That was not part of the original McDonald's plan. Ray Kroc spent extravagant amounts of money on turning it into more of a restaurant experience than a drive-in experience. And so Ray Kroc was actually battling with his own corporate office to make those design changes on the West Coast.
From the beginning on, the standardization of McDonald's was an average taken from the sum of opposing forces. As these forces reached equilibrium by the 1970s, the most ubiquitous McDonald's design of the 20th century emerged. The process that led to this design, called the mansard roof design, was one of finding the great middle ground of consumer tastes. Thus, the first standard McDonald's was born, and we finally have a central point of comparison for our analysis.
So we talked about going from like the space age carport drive-through to mansard roofs and the shingles and the bricks. That was actually strategically chosen by Ray Kroc because people were really annoyed at having this type of fun, optimistic architecture in their cities. They call it eyesores, and McDonald's, to respect zoning laws, instilled this style. And Ray Kroc was like, this is the one. This is the one. No one can complain about a McDonald's that looks like a house.
In the 1970s, people were calling it the Browning of America, which is actually a phrase borrowed from Lewis Mumford. During that time, public opinion had moved against McDonald's again. People were really concerned about the oil crisis and environmental sustainability, and so McDonald's became brown, and it became more subdued.
As McDonald's truly arrived nationwide, the golden age of the standard McDonald's had begun in earnest. Under the surface, however, another form of influence was shaping the way McDonald's grew and developed. The influence of that quintessential American maverick, the individual entrepreneur. In our case, these are McDonald's franchisees, called owner-operators. Ultimately, they were the ones on the ground, and some of them had some pretty big ideas. This non-standard McDonald's, located in North Huntington, Pennsylvania, is a monument to one of the most notable McDonald's owner-operators, Jim Delegati, and his claim to fame, the Big Mac.
Well, definitely, individual franchisees have always been the creative blood of McDonald's, and they developed many products in the early days. So the Big Mac is one of them. The Egg McMuffin is another one.
The outward architecture of this McDonald's pays homage to the retro McDonald's design, dressing up its front half with the arches and slanted roof. The back half, however, is pretty bog standard, if not a couple generations old at this point. If it weren't for the sign, you might miss the treasure inside this McDonald's, a miniature Big Mac museum dedicated to owner-operator Jim Delegati and his prized double-decker sandwich. To the average diner, this enormous Big Mac memorial might seem excessive, but what does the Big Mac stand for, if not excess? Delegati created the sandwich in 1967 to compete with the more extravagant burger offerings from Pittsburgh-area big boy restaurants, the ancestors to modern Eaton Park. Here's a prime example of an owner-operator responding to local tastes. The Big Mac fared so well, McDonald's corporate adopted it and took it nationwide. So to us, the size of this monument is quite appropriate. The Big Mac is a living testament to how a stroke of non-standard deviation can leave a big impact. I wonder what Jim would have thought of the recent white meat spin on his creation. I thought it was pretty tasty. But let's not get too distracted. After all, this story embodies the romantic ideal of the visionary entrepreneur, the hero of the free market, whose mythos of canny ingenuity culturally dominated America's post-war economic boom. That narrative became tightly wound with McDonald's expansion. By becoming an owner-operator, you'd get your chance on the entrepreneurial stage. Some owner-operators took this all the way, and the first examples of what we'd consider the modern, non-standard McDonald's began to appear. Let's cut back to the epic McDonald's again. There's some relevant history on this plot of land, but not in this building. This current iteration of the epic McDonald's, constructed in 2015, is actually the second McDonald's building to stand on this site. The first, dating back to 1976, was, if you can believe it, even more palatial and chaotic than the epic McDonald's of the present day. Dubbed the world's largest entertainment McDonald's, this multi-story madhouse was the brainchild of one Gary Arthur, a Floridian owner-operator that you could call the Grand Duke of Nonstandard McDonald's.
There was one franchise owner named Gary Arthur. He died in 2016, and he was the person behind 25 non-standard McDonald's across all of Orlando. There's Club Safari, European Cafe, there's the Castle. He's behind the Castle. And then he's also the person behind the world's largest McDonald's. That is not a project of McDonald's Corp. That is the dream of a franchise owner.
Orlando has long been one of the roadside attraction capitals of America. So in a sense, this outlandish McDonald's was just Arthur's way of trying to fit into the neighborhood. The original world's largest didn't become that overnight. A bowling alley was added here, a playground was added there, and before you know it, you had a record-breaking restaurant. The most surprising thing about Arthur Foods, though, is just how many locations they operated. A great number of them were non-standard, and many of them featured an expanded menu, starring novelties like McPizza, a culinary jewel still available for purchase at the epic McDonald's. None of these locations seemed to have much thematic relevance to one another. They were sheer spectacle, and that was the point. By the 1970s onward, McDonald's franchising had proven to be a golden opportunity for the time-honored tradition of American showmanship.
And so by the 80s and the 90s, large-scale ventures such as music and film and theme parks were trickling down to smaller concepts. What can we do in the restaurant space? And this was exciting for restaurant owners because they thought this could be a way to get people in the door, keep them there. But their success in business did not come from the mathematical side, but it came from this 20th century concept of the showman, the entrepreneur that has this kind of sixth sense of what the audience wants. And it's very similar to an artist, and it kind of goes very much into the creative space.
With the limited autonomy the franchise model afforded, aspiring showmen across America started to flex that sixth sense by building out McDonald's that were sure to turn some heads. But starting in the mid-1980s, as McDonald's national presence crept closer to equilibrium, the winds of trend that it rode across the U.S. started to shift, ever so slightly. Not all neighborhoods were excited about a McDonald's moving in, and so the restaurant would have to bend, in sometimes non-standard ways. All of the self-appointed visionaries mentioned previously, Dick McDonald, Ray Kroc, Jim Delegati, Gary Arthur, made decisions that they thought would appeal to their local market. These choices were voluntary. Sometimes such choices are not. This is the Independence McDonald's in Independence, Ohio, sometimes called the McMansion or the McColonial. It is a decidedly ahistoric structure, channeling thematic elements of colonial American architecture with a staircase and large columns. Despite appearances, this McDonald's first opened in 1988. Independence, an office park suburb of Cleveland, was undergoing large-scale expansion at that time, and it had an image to cultivate. The name Independence says it all. That sensible, patriotic, business-minded image did not involve the red and yellow of a mansard roof McDonald's, nor did it involve the lower-class image that had come to be associated with the chain.
When a McDonald's is different than the standard, I often think it's a reflection of the affluence of that community or its ability to kind of pressure McDonald's to appear in a different form, to cohere to architectural standards, or I think sometimes the discomfort of having fast food in certain areas.
You see all this like weird patriotism too, and that's where you see like the neo-colonial style come back in various ways. The other thing is that to make the fast food experience ever so slightly elevated requires that you sit inside. So to just do slightly upscale but still eat with your hands, you have to change the way McDonald's looks.
If McDonald's was going to be a part of the Independence community, it needed to dress the part, so said the city zoning board. The easiest way to do that was to occupy a historic building, which had operated as an auto body shop for decades. McDonald's purchased the land, rehabbed the building, and the rest was history. A piece of local flavor is saved, no garish McDonald's stains the meticulously planned Independence, and nearby office park workers get another lunch spot. Everybody wins. This sort of story, an unusual McDonald's whose appearance was dictated by local building codes in an effort to class up the joint, is an extremely common one for non-standard McDonald's around the country, particularly ones built in the late 80s and early 90s. Sometimes these compulsory adaptations of the McDonald's form factor meet their communities more squarely in the middle. Take this McDonald's on Calle Ocho in Miami's Little Havana neighborhood. Opened by owner-operator Armando Montes in 1985, it takes the spot among Calle Ocho's brightly colored storefronts by wearing authentic and purpose-made decor of its own. The mosaic on the front of the restaurant was created by local Cuban-American artists Nelson and Ronald Curas, whose work can be found elsewhere around the neighborhood. This approach of employing local artisans and craftsmen was a common angle, not just for McDonald's, but the entire themed entertainment industry in the late 20th century.
This other aspect of what I've noticed in the 80s and 90s, where there was a rise in craft artisans having the ability within this sort of short period of time to have enough commissions, enough investment to actually kind of create these cottage industries of interior design, like decorative arts, like people who did all sorts of crazy murals. There'd be craftspeople, artisans that it doesn't really exist anymore.
This authenticity was something that could not easily be faked, and McDonald's very intentionally channeled that, cultivating a genuine sense of familiarity and community inside and around its restaurants, leading into a somewhat unexpected role that McDonald's increasingly began to play in American neighborhoods from the 1970s on, the role of a gathering place. A place not just to eat, but to linger. Down the street from the Calle Ocho McDonald's is Domino Park, the heart of Little Havana. This park is where the local Cuban-American community comes to spend a little time, maybe with a round or two of dominoes, as the name implies. This sort of spot, neither home nor place of commerce, is often called a third place. Third places are essential spaces that a neighborhood needs for a community to thrive in it. In America, they've been on the decline for the better part of 50 years.
There's a lack of, the third place in American culture and American design landscape for people to linger, to have like any sort of a public community gathering space. They're pretty rare, most spaces, and McDonald's is a part of that.
When there isn't a bespoke third place around, people will do their best to make one. As the 20th century marched on, McDonald's increasingly found itself filling that gap. The reasons why vary from place to place. For example, from the 70s on, the McDonald's franchising model proved popular among Black American entrepreneurs, and many of their restaurants ended up filling multiple roles in the underserved communities they were built in. In rural areas, there might not be a neutral ground third place for miles, and a McDonald's would be as good of one as any other.
Well, I think it's so dependent on markets, right? Like when I lived in Oklahoma, McDonald's is a post-church kind of place still. And, the ability to get really good Wi-Fi and really good air conditioning there.
I think that lack of third spaces in the American landscape just sort of led to some of these places becoming that gathering area just kind of by default. When there's nowhere else really to go and there's no place to gather, people have to find somewhere.
McDonald's made bespoke attempts to further bolster their role as a gathering place and to benefit from it. In 2004, they made headlines by being one of the earliest businesses to offer up public Wi-Fi access, initially for a price, finally going free in 2010. For a lot of communities, that was a price they were willing to pay when broadband access was sparse. What does this all have to do with non-standardness? Well, let's just say some McDonald's lean into the gathering place angle with their whole body. This is the McDock in Madeira Beach, Florida. Like many beaches in Florida, Madeira has water on both sides of it, its coastal landmass separated from the mainland by inlets. This makes the area extremely popular with boaters. What do you do when you want to draw hungry boaters? You build a dock, of course. This non-standard McDonald's has populated listicles and trivia the world over by being one of the only McDonald's in the world where you can order and pick up from your boat. There's no better third place than one you can dock your boat at. Consider also this beautiful Beach Shack McDonald's in Clearwater Beach, Florida. It's within walking distance from the ocean shore. A shared milkshake or basket of fries is all the better when eaten under the shade of a beachside snack stand roof. This iconic class of structure is almost culturally synonymous with summer. This McDonald's was very likely built with that in mind. It fits so naturally into a place you'd want to spend your time, and thus, by association, McDonald's becomes a place you'd want to spend your time. Clever and a little devious, isn't it? That craftiness probably brings to mind a certain role McDonald's may have played in your life. This is a role that McDonald's built a significant portion of its cultural identity around, only to find it a liability later down the line. That role? A place to play. A play place, if you will.
So, kids in McDonald's, right? I think a lot of kids have fond memories of McDonald's. And with the play places, you could kind of go off and do your own thing as a kid there. McDonald's wants kids to like it because they believed that if they could bring kids in, the kids would bring their entire families in, and then they would just sell a lot more hamburgers and make a lot more money.
If you bring in the kids, the family will follow. Particularly in the baby boom economy, this strategy was lucrative. The absolute brand juggernaut that was Ronald McDonald needs no introduction. He and the McDonaldland mythology that grew up around him were the chief pop culture representation of McDonald's in the American media landscape, and, of course, the theme and basis for many non-standard McDonald's across the country. Ironically enough, Ronald himself was also the creation of owner-operators.
Ronald McDonald was the brainchild of Washington, D.C. owner-operators. They ran those ads locally in D.C. for a while before they became national, Ronald McDonald, the national spokesperson of McDonald's.
The series of McDonaldland props and decorations built by Setmakers Inc. from the 70s through the 90s were at one point so ubiquitous that they may have threatened to redefine what we consider as standard McDonald's altogether. But McDonald's didn't stop with decor. They wanted to become a kid's destination. The play place, as we came to know and love it, was perhaps the single strongest community anchoring point McDonald's ever devised.
1971 is like the first McDonald's playland, so you can see the kind of encroaching influence of how do we market specifically to children, how children influence their parents.
McDonald's birthday parties, and then throughout the 80s and 90s, the addition of the play places, McDonald's was a place for children to go on any day, rather than going to a local park and getting on a playground. You actually go to McDonald's and have lunch there.
That's right, McDonald's birthday parties. Depending on your age, that concept may never have naturally occurred to you. But for certain generations of Americans who grew up during the peak of the non-standard McDonald's, such a celebration was practically a rite of passage. I had one when I was in the single digits. Thankfully, no photo evidence remains. The vast majority of non-standard McDonald's around the country were built to appeal to children. But they didn't stop at Ronald or the play place. Once again, the vision of owner-operators everywhere would manifest non-standard McDonald's both wonderful and strange, destined to become vague fever dream memories for children across America. This one, in Navarre, Florida, is still in operation. It looks fairly normal from the outside, but wait until you dive in. This undersea-themed McDonald's is one of a kind, and is clearly designed with the young, and young at heart, in mind. While many of the remaining McDonald's play places are showing their age, this one's accommodations are fairly modern, with both physical and digital activities for kids. No non-standard menu items here, I don't think, but the appeal of dining at this McDonald's is self-evident. In particular, I was charmed by the signature of the artist and designer of this location, Bruce Berry. Despite my repeated efforts to contact him, Bruce never responded to requests for an interview. Shame. I truly wanted to pick the brain of a non-standard McDonald's auteur. And here we come back to Orlando to put a neat bow on this whole thing. I hope you can see now why this long, meandering journey was necessary to understand the significance of this place. This non-standard McDonald's is everything a non-standard McDonald's has ever been. An environmental adaptation, an ambitious owner-operator's grand spectacle, and a children's wonderland. All of the cultural currents that brought McDonald's to prominence meet here in confluence, resulting in something very weird and a little wonderful. So, it's still standing, thriving. Why the fuss? And why do we so often speak of the non-standard McDonald's in the past tense? Here it comes. Things change. Beauty fades. Rivers run dry. And time takes its share. This McDonald's was, up until recent times, a shrine to NASCAR and McDonald's long involvement as a sponsor. A real stock car in the dining room, walls covered with memorabilia, and floor-to-ceiling trackside decor. Not even a shred remains. It's not just the NASCAR McDonald's. Non-standard McDonald's everywhere are disappearing, either being restandardized or closed entirely. This, too, was once a non-standard McDonald's. It's located in Davie, Florida, a so-called cowboy town near Fort Lauderdale, with a long history of Old West pastiche in its tourist attractions. Today, many remnants of that have receded or disappeared, marking a decades-long shift in the role of themed retail across American life. That was a wave of change that not even the mighty McDonald's could defy.
McDonald's has changed from that kind of decorated shed paradigm. The brand identity is not as playful, it is not as loud, it is not nostalgic. And so this period of McDonald's, these big golden arches, these decorated shed McDonald's, really are themselves now historicized, I think.
The boom times of themed retail, the 80s and 90s, are far behind us. Before the internet, keeping your brand ever present in the consumer consciousness was a much more roundabout task. One way to do that was to design your store to be as impactful a space as possible, one that would create powerful memories and experiential associations with a given brand.
Companies at the time couldn't really do too much more innovation with their products to differentiate them from each other. They couldn't really do much with services. But this next level up would be kind of experiential spaces, and you would kind of make sure that it fell into every possible design aspect and like multi-sensory experience.
To win a battle for consumer impressions was to outdo your competition in an ever-escalating arms race of spectacle. Maximalist design is a good phrase to describe much of the wacky, high-energy, in-your-face aesthetic that we associate with the 90s and with non-standard McDonald's. This larger-than-life trend in retail design was empowered by advancements in materials and technology.
Computer design was becoming more common in the late 80s and the 90s, which allowed for vibrant and different and zany designs to be created, create the wacky shapes that we attribute with the plastic materials of the 80s and 90s. And people were excited by that. Consumers were excited by that. Designers were excited by that.
Exciting new prospects, to be sure, but all booms must bust by their nature. For instance, consider the sort of playful futurism embodied in the earliest McDonald's restaurant buildings, and how, as the chain spread nationally, it adapted to that more subdued, urbane appearance in reaction to America's so-called browning. The simple truth here is that design trends often move in reactive cycles, responding to public fatigue with certain styles or aesthetics. The themed retail boom was the era that birthed over-the-top dining experiences like Rainforest Cafe and Planet Hollywood. Unfortunately, we all know now where they ended up. Of all businesses, restaurants know just how fickle consumer tastes can be. Not only was the themed retail boom running on borrowed time, it was running on vast amounts of borrowed money. until a more cost-effective strategy came along.
It was only really feasible for that short span of time when companies and investors thought that that was the next frontier of like making profit before they realized that they could do it so much cheaper. They didn't have to invest in physical spaces. Around the time the Great Recession hit, looking back, it really changed like the entire design landscape from commercial to residential. The kind of craft industry that we spoke of before, that mostly dried up.
2008 is a major turning point towards the non-standard McDonald's decline. The economic effects of the Great Recession, cultural shifts towards minimalist design brought on by trendsetters like the iPhone, and the mainstream explosion of social media usage completely changed how consumers shopped and what for. Theming grew less important, and its expense and upkeep became much more conspicuous to investors.
It ties into what's been happening to malls over the past 30 or 40 years, where there's investment that's required to maintain design after it's been initially built. And so that's another unfortunate side effect of kind of the way the economy has moved over the past couple of decades, is that there's a lack of willingness to put maintenance money towards really anything.
When I said earlier that restaurants know how fickle consumer taste can be, I wasn't speaking strictly in metaphor. Along our winding journey, it might be easy to forget that McDonald's is primarily a place to grab cheap food quick. Always has been. But as fast casual dining options have improved and diversified over the past couple of decades, it turns out that diners just aren't as jazzed about the McDonald's hamburger as they used to be, which in turn makes McDonald's less of a destination and more of a stop.
And so I think that this idea that an unusual McDonald's is a destination, I think that has changed. But at the end of the day, the question is McDonald's a space for people to be? Or does McDonald's provide food quickly so that you can be somewhere else?
It's a hard sell for a modern consumer to go to a McDonald's or a Wendy's or a Burger King and eat sitting down. Why are we going to continue to build and maintain these dining rooms when the consumers don't want to be in them? A big factor in this is that there are many, many concepts that are just one step up from a McDonald's or are just one tier above in the minds of consumers. I'm thinking Chipotle, like Freddy's or a Shake Shack. They're a little bit more expensive, but they're much higher quality.
Quality. This has been a big cultural sticking point for McDonald's food for decades, particularly when it comes to healthy eating. In the mid-2000s, a wave of scrutiny from popular books and documentaries about McDonald's food led to diners having increased reservations about frequent fast food meals. McDonald's has made plenty of menu updates in response. A salad item here, a snack wrap there, apple slices in the Happy Meal, I could go on. But it is an image problem that they've never really been able to shake.
During this time, there was a huge backlash in the American public against fast food. I remember when I was in school, middle school, which was 2005 through 2008, we had to watch Super Size Me. And in the book Fast Food Nation, we had to read. It was part of, a kind of public health scare you straight type rhetoric.
In the 2000s, I specifically remember the backlash McDonald's had against it in terms of its health and children.
Those interior spaces, their association with that style of marketing towards kids in the late 90s and early 2000s kind of left a bad taste in parents' mouths.
The major factor tying all of this McDonald's backlash together was the brand's close relationship with children and the health implications for kids with a McDonald's-heavy diet. McDonald's had thoroughly bound itself to the scaffolding of the American childhood experience. Ronald McDonald was practically their cultural ambassador. This strategy proved lucrative for decades. Now, as parents started to distance their kids from the once alluring children's day out that McDonald's and its play place provided, the pressure for change was mounting. Part of this change would involve a long, hard look at the visual presentation and aesthetics McDonald's had come to be associated with.
And so what I hypothesize a little bit is that the interior design of those spaces was linked in people's minds because it shared the sort of similar design motifs, was linked to the commercials of the era, like the toys, the commercials, the marketing.
People don't feel comfortable or they don't feel like they're good parents if they're bringing their kid to McDonald's. And that's why you have stuff like the Walt Disney World McDonald's going from this like exploding Happy Meal to a McSolar panel.
Wait. McSolar panel? Wouldn't you know it, there's another non-standard McDonald's near the Orlando theme parks. This one closer to Walt Disney World. This one was so curious, we even brought Quentin of Quentin Reviews to join our Florida shoot crew and check it out. One quick look, though, and it's clear that this McDonald's is the product of an entirely different era than that of its epic cousin. Greenery is everywhere, inside and out, and the entire space is built around natural light, breaking down the barrier between McDonald's and the natural world as much as possible. This is the face of a McDonald's for our times, or so this restaurant seems to proclaim. When it was constructed in 2020, this location was celebrated as the first net zero energy McDonald's ever built, with much of its power generated by on-site solar panels. In an almost farcical twist, diners can help contribute to that net zero energy by generating it themselves on a set of exercise bikes. In our context, it's hard not to at least chuckle at this idea. Try as it might, I don't think it's able to escape the image of being a direct, unsubtle response to health criticism against McDonald's. Oh well, at least Billiam and Quentin are having fun. This McDonald's is non-standard, no doubt about it, but in some senses, it is the biggest and most elaborate standard McDonald's of all. Many of the decor choices within this McDonald's may be very familiar to you. The color of the vinyl wall planks, for instance. This visual language has been popping up in McDonald's nationwide with increased ubiquity, and this is no coincidence. This is just another part of a massive nationwide campaign McDonald's has undertaken to modernize its entire fleet of restaurants. This means that non-standard McDonald's have been disappearing at rates hitherto unseen.
So I think that also that standardization comes with some of the new technologies that we see in fast food restaurants. The touchscreen ordering, the system of double drive-thrus, all of those things, I think, lend itself to a kind of needing a standard model.
A conspicuous element of this model, however, is the de-emphasizing of the dine-in experience. Everything about the process has been streamlined to make getting in and getting out as fast as possible.
For those redesigns, McDonald's is asking itself, do people actually come to McDonald's and sit here as a family to eat? The answer is maybe, sometimes.
The hope seems to be that what few people choose to linger in a modern McDonald's can do so in isolation, free to use the Wi-Fi and keep to themselves. McDonald's has noted its declining popularity as a gathering place and seems to have bowed out gracefully. In many senses, this modern McDonald's design is all about playing catch-up, both to their competition and to the simple realities of how people eat in the 2020s.
I don't want to go to this building that looks like it hasn't been updated for 10 years and then put something into my body. And so in the early 2000s, and especially by 2010, Rainforest Cafes and Planet Hollywoods, and these types of zany, busy, curvy, colorful ventures now look like they're from 10 years ago. And that for consumers, even if it's subconscious, is driving them away from it.
For a time being, it almost seemed like McDonald's was a bit threatened by Starbucks and their kind of design branding and their brand identity and everything like that it was taking over, and they tried to do their McCafe concept, and then they moved that whole design language throughout their full locations.
It's hard to look at a modern McDonald's and not think of a Starbucks, imitating an experience made famous by one of its greatest competitors in the beverage space. Never underestimate how much revenue McCafe brings in for McDonald's, by the way. Rather than maintaining a distinct identity, McDonald's is very much playing to the crowd with this one, in hopes that they'll find something that works as a baseline going forward. That model seems to be more quiet cafe and less play place, for multiple reasons.
Because they were having basically a PR crisis and needed to create a space that seemed a little bit more highbrow.
It looks kind of like a coffee shop, and that is not on accident. For the McDonald's that are still focusing on getting people to go to them and sit down at them, the coffee shop atmosphere is exactly what they need, because when people do that, especially nowadays, it is to use internet and work remote and work and consume at the same time. It is no longer an environment that kids would go to and just run around.
The modern McDonald's restaurant has chosen this identity for itself because it doesn't realistically have many other avenues. With its brand image problems still visible in the rearview mirror and its competitors at either side, the way forward is a narrow one. The quiet turning of the page on non-standard McDonald's everywhere in favor of this unified image is ultimately McDonald's pursuing that narrow way forward in the name of better control of its resources and better control of its public image.
And now each individual location represents the whole brand. And if somebody has a problem with the McDonald's on 2nd Street, they have a problem with the McDonald's Corporation, something that was not the case in the 70s and 80s. You might even know your local McDonald's franchisee in the 70s and 80s, but nowadays there's one company there somewhere in a tower that I can't see. And so because of that, there was this huge standardization process.
So, McDonald's is boring looking on purpose now. The chapter of its life where it regularly flourished as a sort of themed attraction has closed. McDonald's seems to like it that way. It's a lot easier to maintain, its image is a lot easier to manage, and consumers seem to prefer it to the alternatives of McDonald's past. The future has arrived, and it is decidedly, definitively standard. We find ourselves back at the very same crossroads at which we started this journey. I hope that by taking it, we have planted this monument's significance in another heart, another mind. That will help it continue to live on for however long it will stay here on this small patch of earth. I think now is as good a time as any to remember where it actually came from. A non-standard McDonald's located at the Easton Shopping Center in Columbus, Ohio. This Ronald was merely the marquee sign above the door, welcoming shoppers into an elaborately themed McDonald's. Now, he is the only living relic of this brief, strange time and place where such a concept was ever within the realm of the possible. With the circle of our tale closed, he is known now, wholly and truly. I hope that grants him some peace. When I came back to this location a second time to film, I noticed that the McRib sandwich had once again returned from its obscurity, which it seldom does. I felt an obligation to try it, considering my mission, but I have to admit, one bite was enough. There are some things that God simply did not intend to share the same time and space. I felt that way about me and Ronald, too. So, what now? What can we do? What should we do? The thought naturally emerges. What if we saved some non-standard McDonald's, preserved them in some way? A nice idea, to be sure, but there are so many obstacles in the way, it would be a long shot at best.
I think it would be great to preserve as many as possible. I know McDonald's doesn't have probably an interest in doing that.
And a lot of these spaces, just by their very construction and the way they're oriented, makes it very difficult to really preserve anything out of them.
Everything from ownership to funding to classification to preserving the low durability materials used for theming. I can't imagine that a McDonald's with giant zoo animals necessarily built them to last. All of these things are major roadblocks to preservation, but there's a bigger, more existential problem. Would people even want a non-standard McDonald's if it was no longer a McDonald's, but had become something else?
But the purpose of doing this in the first place, selling hamburgers, was never to create little museums across the country that would never be changed. The purpose is to sell hamburgers, and the end purpose in 100 years will be to sell hamburgers, or whatever they'll be selling in 100 years. That will always be the driving force. And so whether these things should be preserved or not, I feel like it's hard to say.
Themed retail, non-standard McDonald's included, occupies a strange space between commercial venture and postmodern spectacle that does not neatly fall into what society, or even popular consensus, has deemed worth preserving. Part of what makes non-standard McDonald's interesting to begin with is how complicated of a relationship people have with them, and how we're still establishing the social vocabulary to even discuss them. By the time we figure all of that out, it is likely that most of the non-standard McDonald's that remain today will exist only in memory.
In my perspective, in terms of art, especially in regards to architectural themed entertainment, theme parks, these types of ventures that were derived from capitalistic want of profits that then caught on with the consumer to a point where they became culture. The difference is between art being expression and art for a profit. It's not a dichotomy, it's not one or the other. But in terms of something like a McDonald's, it is so obviously one of those. But now it's no longer the place you went with your dad. It's no longer the place that you drove home from work and saw. It's something else. And that hurts.
The gears of change that brought about the end of the non-standard McDonald's as we know it began to turn decades ago. The extremely specific coalescence of factors that let them flourish at all has long fallen out of alignment. But even if the last non-standard McDonald's were to disappear, the idea of a non-standard McDonald's is now something uniquely identifiable enough to live on in its own context. In culture, that is power, and power has value. Sometimes, in ways we truly do not expect, the forces of the world respond to this. This is Cosmix, a new, different non-standard McDonald's. As of this writing, it is less than a year old. Its initial location opened in Illinois, and a smattering of locations in Texas followed.
I went to Cosmix. I thought it was cute. The food was okay, but it is fun. It is cute. It is different. It's playful. And I don't mean playfulness in like the kind of Google tech way, right? I mean playfulness in a generally like, yeah, this is tacky. This is a little zany. This is a little silly. It's kitsch, yeah. And actually the thing about kitsch is people love kitsch.
Make no mistake, there are some pretty big differences between Cosmix and non-standard McDonald's of the past. For one, Cosmix is its own animal. No Big Macs here. Drinks and nibbles only. Another clear attempt to keep up with Starbucks. Another big change? No indoor dining area. That makes sense considering how McDonald's has increasingly de-emphasized dining in. As far as theming goes, Cosmix is most certainly a decorated shed. We won't be seeing one shaped like the UFO McDonald's in Roswell, I'd reckon. And yet, despite all this, it fits our definition of a non-standard McDonald's. It is a McDonald's restaurant, or a form of one anyway, with unique menu items and a unique look. The non-standard McDonald's lives, in some form. Which begs the question, why now? We've listed 1.5 million reasons in this documentary why McDonald's walked away from the non-standard McDonald's as a concept. Why return to it? Well, you're watching this documentary, aren't you? It's not just you thinking about non-standard McDonald's. Looking at the nostalgia clock, it's just about that time.
Of course, there's kind of a huge wave of nostalgia amongst millennials and Gen Z, looking back at this era of more playful, goofy, exuberant theme design, desiring some kind of return to that in a sense. And I think corporations do recognize it.
Over the past 5 or 6 years, McDonald's has been actively embracing its weirder history and cultural iconography in a new, controlled, top-down fashion. From the Grimace Shake to the Travis Scott meal to their recent line of commemorative cups, McDonald's has returned to capitalize upon the nostalgia of the non-standard McDonald's generation. It makes sense that revisiting a more corporate idea of non-standard McDonald's in the form of Cosmix is part of that plan. But consider the Grimace Shake. If you listened to McDonald's, you'd see it as a part of Grimace's big birthday celebration. If you listened to TikTok, though, you'd be fearing for your life. For every nostalgic power play McDonald's carefully plans and executes, there is a reaction of measured chaos in its wake. McDonald's seems to be ready and willing to abide this chaos, understanding that all buzz is good buzz in the social media age. It does so knowing that it does not have, and cannot have, the power to truly control it. The force that birthed the killer Grimace Shake is the same force that fuels the ongoing fascination with non-standard McDonald's. The human compulsion to raise up sincerity, even from the constructs of the cynical.
Kitsch is fundamentally sincere, and we live in a society incapable of sincerity. Non-standard McDonald's is sincere. Like, that's the distinction. It's not just like appropriating something that is sincere for ironical purposes. Kitsch is absolutely self-unaware. This is what's missing. This is why novelty architecture is so precious to people.
I think that there's that nostalgia for these non-standard McDonald's because it's one of the more gentle strains of American culture at large. They're all franchises to an owner's love of something. It's very twee, it's very adorable. It's one of the few things we can almost be proud of, because what else? It's really hard to be happy to be American.
In the era of the A/B test, the data-driven decision, and the algorithmic feed, we crave sincerity. With all its mess, its impracticality, its vulnerability. The non-standard McDonald's is such a captivating thing because it embodies those sincere qualities, while simultaneously wearing the badge of a massive multinational corporation. It is proof that sincerity can bloom wherever we can recognize joy and claim it for ourselves. Does McDonald's know all this as they try their hand at the non-standard McDonald's yet again with Cosmix? Most certainly. The critical amongst us could point out Cosmix as yet another distraction from the myriad of socioeconomic impacts McDonald's has on American life and beyond, and they wouldn't be off base to do so. But to truly command sincerity is beyond the power of a brand. They can only influence it. We don't have to play the brand game to enjoy the scenery. If Cosmix is here, let's enjoy its strangeness in whatever way we think is right and responsible. Having fun is not endorsement. Celebrating the strangeness of the non-standard McDonald's and keeping the human narrative of its legacy alive is the only real way to preserve the goodness and kindness in the sincerity we found.
Kitsch is an important part of life, of aesthetic life. The origins of theming exist in the human imagination and also the desire to escape in some way from the ordinary landscape, to escape to something maybe nostalgic or maybe something that makes us feel like we can pretend to be a little bit younger.
I don't think the non-standard McDonald's will ever happen again in terms of a local franchisee contracting a third party to create an under-the-sea McDonald's because that's what that guy wants. I don't think that'll ever happen again. But in terms of will they ever be this two-dimensional and simplistic again, I would think not. And I would think that it will go in a direction of either more retro or more zany, more rounded, more colorful, just because the consumer wants it and because we can functionally do that across the board. And I don't think it's really that big of a trick. It's not evil to create a space that people want to exist in. It's just neutral. It's I created something that I think you might like.
The non-standard McDonald's is a complex product of its circumstances. Those circumstances change, and their merit is continually reevaluated by culture. As layer upon layer of context diminished the perceived cultural value of the non-standard McDonald's, its era of novelty came to a close, and its decline irreversibly began. It can never truly occupy the same space or the same form it once did before we knew it in our lives. But, however incidental it may be, all the joy we found along the way is ours. The world, in all its hurting, is still vast and full of strangeness. To marvel at that, and carry that marvel with us, is inherent to the curiosity of every human being. The true value of that is up to each of us to determine. So, I think this is farewell, Ronald. You're out of the spotlight now, and I don't think you should necessarily come back to it in the same way. But even if things are complicated, I say this with sincerity. Thank you for the good times. You rest easy now. We can take it from here.
Have you ever seen a McDonald's like this one? Have you ever heard a cowboy Ronald say yee-haw? On the Nile in the future, in a tunnel water feature. No, it's not a McDream. There's no Burger Queen. Your Big Mac's safe inside this castle. The real McCriminals have been shackled. Non-standard McDonald's. Surreal mysteries of some questionable architectural expertise. Non-standard McDonald's. So much history in these ethereal McTravesties. Jackson, Roman mansion, ferryboat barge down on a mountain. Big sinners make saints. White arch, black arch, one arch, no arch, stained glass, statuesque, Warcraft, holy church, beaten and McDam, the broken and condemned. McDonald's. Surreal mysteries of some questionable architectural expertise. Non-standard McDonald's.